Thank you so much for being with us for this very important session. It's very rare for all of us to have the opportunity to have a one-to-one discussion with a CEO of an airline, whether in Africa or Europe or North America. So I really want to thank Mr. Jarana, Vuyani, for very kindly being with us again. In fact, it's becoming one of the highlights of our conference, the yearly updates you give us. And we know it's precious time, and we value your presence here. So thank you so much. Mr. Jarana just mentioned to the technician that if I ask the wrong questions, please cut the mic. He said if the audience feels we're drifting off point, cut the mic. So I'm sure we'll have a very engaging interaction. And really, it's not all about me asking questions. I would really like the audience, the participants, to engage with the CEO, because this is for the benefit of all of us. I was telling Mr. Jarana, Vuyani, if you don't mind me calling you, please, Vuyani, thank you so much, that when he was giving his opening address, I could see he was speaking without notes about this crazy industry, in quotes. And he agreed with me that in the time he's been in office, he really has come to grips with the sometimes illogical logicals of the aviation industry. I mean, sometimes aviation defies logic. You might have full loads and still be making a loss. How do you explain that? Yes. New routes development, partnerships, etc. It's such a tough industry. Everybody around you seems to be making money, with no disrespect to the lessors and the OEMs. Everybody seems to be making, I think you agree, I could see, but I'm joking really, it's tongue-in-cheek. It should be a win-win for all of us, and I know that's what we all want to see. So I would like to start by asking Vuyani again to please give us a summary of his professional career and what insights he's learned since being appointed the CEO of SAA. So over to you, sir.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Nick. Well, I come from a telecoms background, so I see myself as a digital evangelist. So in my previous employer, I worked a lot on technology. I had a good sense of when technology intersects with social issues, and therefore we're able to craft solutions that are able to actually mediate or actually help transform society. So in key sectors of the economy, whether it's in education, bridging the divide between rural and urban, rich and poor, urban and peri-urban, how do you make sure that in a continental Africa, you are able to provide access to libraries through digital platform, digital content to rural communities, given the fact that it's going to be very difficult for many African countries to build libraries for every school. Actually, with digital, you don't need to do it anymore. All you need to do is to do digital enablement. So projects like that, projects like transforming agriculture value chain in the continent, aggregating produce from smallholder farmers, be able to pull it together, and so that the big players, whether it's Unilever and others, can actually be able to have predictability of supply. So we did a lot of work in that area, including healthcare supply, healthcare value chains, digital health. So understanding of technology, how it intersects with social issues, understanding technology, how it can enhance customer experience. That's the work I've done for a greater part of my work life. And of course, being trained in the engineering domain teaches you what we call diagnostic. We talk about troubleshooting, how you can be able to unveil and discover cause and effect, and be able. It helps you with strategic thinking and logic. So that's kind of my background. Yeah. Coming to SAA, coming to aviation sector, really trying to understand the economics of the sector has been one of the key highlights for me. How you make money in the sector. And one of the early observations, and I still have a bit of a license to speak a little bit freely because I see myself as an insurgent into the industry, because many people have got 25 years, 30 years, lifetime employment has happened in this industry. So even if I'm 5 years, Dion is also new, he's here as a CFO. it will still be very new. So we're a couple of months, maybe a year and a half, 2 years in. One of the things I've observed on the value chain, you touch it, is that my observation is that airlines or airline shareholders tend to be almost like a venue for profit-taking Olympics to happen, if I may put it that way. If you look at the value chain participants, you've got staff, you've got pilots, you've got OEMs, you've got lessors, you've got airports companies, you've got regulators, you've got distributors, GDSs, you've got trade partners, TMCs, and many others. If you can take a P&L per customer and actually do allocation of that revenue stream, you find that more often than not, there's very little left for the shareholders of the airline. So that's the nature of what I see in the ecosystem, the universe of this industry. Something has to change. There has to be a degree of awareness that there has to be proportionate distribution of profits in the value chain. And in any industry, of course, it's also about the power play. So if you are not strong enough, therefore you're going to be left with the vagaries of being left with the crumbs. I think this is one of the things that I've seen in the industry. There's a need, therefore, to create a new partnership for a sustainable future. And that should not be based on whether the airline is big or small, because I presume the bigger guys have a power base to actually shape the value chain. But the smaller guys, the fragmented industry parts in the continent, you are always going to be on the wrong side of the stick. So this is kind of the observation, and from my side, in my year plus being here. So that's an important point. I think industry players need to understand at some point the value chain, the ecosystem has to be balanced. So in just in the fashion that I've outlined. And I'm aware this is business. It's not going to be balanced because people just have a moment of higher purpose. Airlines are going to have to work close enough to bulk up scale in order to shape the whole value chain and rebalance it. I actually don't think rebalancing the value chain doesn't mean anyone loses. It just means that you bring back the right proportionality so that we can be sustainable, all of us. Yeah. And this is not to compensate for inefficiency in operations. I count everyone, pilots, staff, lessors, OEM, digital distribution partners, fuel people, government, airline. Everyone is profit-taking, but the airline is not. Yeah. So we have to understand that you can't be a venue for profit-taking Olympics where you don't participate. You actually host a venue like the stadium, so you get nothing, no benefit. So that's, for me, the observation. And I think a lot of what we need to do around, and I must be honest, I can't take our own situation and overlay it and say it's an industry standard when it comes to customer experience. A lot of work needs to be done on the digital side to actually make sure that we can improve customer experience throughout the customer journey. And it's not just the airline, it's the airports, from when you prospecting to buy throughout the travel journey until you deplane and perhaps when you get home. So there's a lot of investments needed there, and I think most of the airlines, the big ones, the much more mature, are doing these investments. My sense is that given the maturity of the industry, even the best ones are still behind the curve from what I would have expected this industry to be in. There's a huge catch-up for everybody. Yeah. Some the mature ones are a lot more advanced, but they are not where I thought that the digital maturity would be, in my own view. And please, this is not market research, it's purely an observation, and it's no criticism. But the smaller ones, the ones that are still struggling to get to profitability, they have to lift IT platforms to be able to exploit digital innovation. Lots of work needs to be done. So those are the kind of early observations. So the structure of the industry, the value chain, which I think needs to be rebalanced so that everyone is sustainable. And I guess just the nature of the state of how you engage customers. So those are kind of my views about the industry, and I need us to take them as views of an insurgent. So I'm not a native into the aviation sector.
Would you call yourself a disruptor?
I think in many ways, I would like to see myself as that. I think if we were not rebuilding SAA from some of the building blocks around digital, around the cost-to-income ratios, if we are finding an airline that's already in the break-even position and with the right IT platform for innovation, the disruption will be a lot more visible. So I think we're building the capability to launch ourselves into the digital space and actually change the relationships between cost and income, but also value chain optimization. So everybody else in the value chain has to come through the eye of the needle to make sure that we can justify our existence, or we can justify our sense of profit taking. This is how we create together. This is how we look at sustainability. So this is my focus, and I'm quite aggressive around those aspects.
So in a nutshell, you would like to see a more level playing field in terms of the risk-reward ratio, where all players, when you look at it, the airline creates the business, and all the suppliers and partners sort of enjoy it more than yourselves.
Absolutely.
And that needs to be reshaped so that everybody benefits.
Absolutely. And Nick, I'm not naive. I'm not thinking that it's going to be some moment of utopia where all of us get into the room and say, well, we actually love one another in so much that we need to rebalance. We are going to have to do specific things in the commercial arena to force the value chain to respond accordingly. And some of these things, if you don't have scale and you're slightly vulnerable, you may not be able to achieve them. But also what we are also clear about is that from an SA point of view, we talk about long-term partnerships. The people and partners who come through during the time of difficulty and challenge and work with us to create a new platform, when actually we have less leverage over them, are the people that we see as long-term partners that we will work with, and we'll always remember them. But those who call us bluff at the time of difficulty and challenge, then we start to see, is this family? Are these the people who have to work with into the future? Certainly not. I think this is where we talk about principle and the big idea and purpose-based organization. But also, we also know that as airlines in the continent, we have to work together to aggregate economies of scale, to bring back the buying power so that we're able to win together. So it's not going to be a philosophical agreement based on, well, I'm happy to lose margin of 3-4% because I think it's the right thing to do. That's not how business works. We're going to have also to put value proposition that helps the partners to understand that in the long term, it makes sense for them to give us a break today. Alternatively, bulking up scale and consolidating buying power in the continent is one of the things we must do. They're easier said than done, but if you look at the history of the aviation in the sector, in the continent, we do not have an option but to stop the egos and start focusing on doing what's right for all of us, sustainability. This doesn't tinker with competition or anything. It's purely making sure that we earn a bit of space. We give ourselves headroom to transform the business, not just SA, continent-wise. That's the thinking.
Thank you so much. Let us look at the macro industry in Africa. We've heard of Yamoussoukro decision. We've heard of the single African air transport market, SATM. I'd like to dwell on that from a South African perspective. It's true to say we've heard from Mr. Chris Weigenthal today that African airlines aren't cooperating enough, and yet the business in Africa is growing. But the beneficiaries in Africa seem to be Emirates, Qatar, etc., while the African airlines are busy sort of not working together. So when we look at the SATM and YD, what is your perspective? Because until African airlines work together, until we open our skies, nothing concrete will really happen. And the industry the African operators will just be marginalized within their own industry. So what needs to be done? Is the fault with the governments, African governments, with the AU, the African Union, or is it with the African airlines, or is everybody severally to blame? What do we need to do? We need a seismic shift of thinking in moving the aviation industry forward.
So I think it's an important point. Firstly, the enabling legislative framework by AU, SATAM, and so on is very good. It creates the right environment for for business leaders to start doing something meaningful and practical within the aviation sector. In my view, if we look at such enablement policies as purely as an instrument for one airline to say, I'm going to have more frequencies into country X, or freedom rights from country X to Europe and somewhere else, I think we are looking at it from a very tactical, conventional way. And therefore, even with that policy, you will probably achieve less success. Because even with an enabling environment, there is still this big aspiration of local or regional participation. So it's I don't think that there's going to be a winner-take-it-all environment in Africa exploiting the legislative framework like SATAM and others. If we take that approach, we are always going to have hurdles, stumbling block, and so on. I think what we need as an industry is to take the enabling environment and begin to understand what's happening globally in the aviation sector. I mean, I did say when I was opening that if you look at US is a beneficiary, in my own view, of the shakeout industry, which was based on collapsing economics of the aviation sector. But they emerged with a much more powerful structure of the industry that allows sustainability of airlines, and you could argue probably this is the most profitable, if you like, market. I would argue by just looking at, if you go to the US, high traffic volumes, right level of competition. You can argue whether there could be more done around service, customer experience. You could argue, I think these things evolve. I said that in Europe, you still see largely 3 big players, and the attempt to have many others have proven not to work if you look at the kind of bankruptcies or shutdown of the smaller airlines in Europe. So we need to look at that and say, what does it do for Africa? And your problem in the continent, you probably will say there are probably 3 or 4 big people, big guys, Kenya, SAA, Ethiopia, and Egypt. Yeah. And that begins to be seen as a proxy for the market. Actually, it's an imperfect proxy if you look at the geography, the geometry of flying in the continent. So we have to work to look at, if you can't address consolidation by saying these 4 are a good proxy for the market. I think the answer is beyond looking at the 4. It's about saying, how do you make that amongst the 4, there's a lot more collaboration to sustain the economics, their own economics. So the interventions that could come out, the enablement of SATAM, if we address it purely to say, okay, SA now can go to Nigeria and do many things there alone, I don't think it's the right answer. It's sustainable. It's about bulking up scale, making sure that we are a sizable business that's got buying power, that has got economic power to actually shape the value chain and be able to connect many city pairs of smaller cities in the continent. So that's why I'm saying the challenge is, when I look at the economics of the air aviation in Africa, you can't address them using a template from Europe or from the US, because you're dealing with a different kind of structure, market structure altogether. And when you assess antitrust immunity laws and so on, you can't use the formulas that are used in Europe or the US. You have to understand the peculiarity of the African continent. And that's what, as leaders of airlines, we must start pushing forward on that. Government has done enough to enable. We need to find commercial instruments that are balanced, that sit on top of those legislative framework. And I don't think it's a choice thing. I think it's something we have to do as a matter of urgency.
Okay, let me turn, thank you so much for that. Let me turn to Ethiopian Airlines, comparing Ethiopian Airlines' business strategy with that of South African Airways, for example. Two great airlines, African Airlines, of course. In yesteryear, South African Airways were far ahead of Ethiopian. This is a fact. And yet recently, in recent years, Ethiopian Airlines have leapfrogged everybody in the field. But specifically, my point is that what they've done, while the rest of Africa is talking about open skies and access to markets, they have gone around the continent and cherry-picked hubs, Malawi, Togo, Chad, Ghana, establishing joint venture partnerships and creating, basically taking the market. Because what they're doing now is feeding Addis from all these hubs throughout Africa. And while it's win-win for maybe Ghana or Malawi, the fact is Ethiopian is consolidating their dominance in the African market. Why isn't SA doing that?
Look, I think
Or do
firstly,
you plan to do it? Is probably a better way of putting it.
probably not.
Okay.
But of course, strategy is about timing.
Yes.
It's not an ideology. So
Okay.
it's about the timing when you do things, what the market is telling you to do. I think we have to understand that for a long period of time, Johannesburg or South Africa has been largely a gateway into Africa for a long period for many decades, if you like, for the past, say 2 decades, 25 years. And Johannesburg has been the distribution point. So if you look at our network, it's almost like the star in Johannesburg pushing up into the continent north, if you like, to sub-Saharan Africa. Also, you have to understand the global traffic flows, that most of the intercontinental traffic flows, they are destined for South Africa, a bigger chunk of it. So effectively, South Africa as a destination is a proxy for intercontinental traffic into the continent. So there lies the advantage for SAA with licensing and traffic routes to different parts of the world. So this is the advantage which is under-leveraged because of our history, how we operate, the cost base and so on, which is the work we are doing to transform the airline. So we transforming the airline to lower the cost base so as to be able to grow, because the opportunity is there. We can fly in any destination. If you look at global traffic flows, they come here, and most of them would have loved to have direct. So our strategy has been Johannesburg as a hub, and we haven't lost that. But keep in mind, though, that what is happening with Ethiopian Airways, by the way, we congratulate them. We like what they're doing.
And you're a partner with them in the Star Alliance.
We are Star Alliance. We have to work with them. We have to collaborate. We like what they are doing. They are pulling through traffic into different entry points, different aggregation points in the continent to Addis. Same strategy you see with the Gulf Airlines, where they are extracting traffic in different entry points in the continent, right to Doha and Dubai, and then they distribute to the world. So invariable, you're going to have to work to understand that the market has moved. You're going to have to adjust your strategy accordingly to respond to the new developments. So we see the Ethiopia plan for Addis not necessarily as a setback for SAA, but actually as further strengthening African aviation, because what we lose to Ethiopia, we could have lost to other non-African
Yes,
airlines.
I mean, the main thrust of my question is, do you plan to have such joint ventures? And you've said no.
No. So not in a sense to say we want to go in each country and build equity-based kind of collaboration. So we said that's not in the radar today. But we know that the commercial joint venture agreements, the collaboration in the continent is the way to go. If you look at the partnership models in the airline, I'm talking to aviation experts here, you've got Interline, you've got a standalone company like Mango used to be, with no interconnectivity with other airlines. Then you've got Interline, you've got Codeshare on the continuum. So in between M&A, there's a spot for commercial JV where you're able to create something meaningful, leveraging each other's scale. So that's a sweet spot where, from an SA point of view, we're busy prospecting to say, how do we work, who are the partners who have the same aspiration, who share the same ambitions?
So let's talk about your Ghana hub. You very successfully established a partnership with African World Airways in Accra, Ghana. And I know the airline in Ghana is very appreciative of the support that you provide. So it's really a very innovative and positive development. Can you just talk about it for a few minutes?
It's a very important development because it talks about partnering and working towards commercial joint venture agreements. So, but you have to build trust and confidence in the relationship as you move forward. So, what AAA does for us, they defeat our network, especially going to Cote d'Ivoire, going to Washington, D.C. So we are able now to buy a ticket from Johannesburg right to Freetown, to Monrovia, as well as from Washington, D.C. right to Freetown, to Monrovia, to Lagos, if you like. So it's a very strategic partnership at the regional level. So we want to tie these relationships. So you start with basic Interline, you go to Codeshare. Ultimately, perhaps what we'd like to achieve is a form of a franchise agreement, which is not necessarily equity-based, but really based on, you see, the SA brand is very strong. So the ability to acquire customers through our IP is very, very high across the globe. So then we give AWA leverage. All of a sudden, they have an acquisition engine that's sitting in the US, which they wouldn't have before. And they have customers coming through over the conveyor belt. And all they do, they have to just take them further. Adjusting network, realigning networks to shorten the connecting times in Accra, critical. So when I say no, I said we're not looking at doing equity-based kind of transactions. We are of the view that partnership up to commercial JV structure keeps the independence of everyone, but also pulls together the economics. So when I talk about aggregating economics, that's where I'm talking about the sweet spot between code share and equity. So we think that the commercial JV structure, if well thought through, well structured, can be quite a powerful tool to bring back the African aviation back on its feet.
Thank you. And as you pointed out, SA operates to the US through Accra, Ghana, picking up packs from West Africa.
Absolutely.
And it's going very well.
Absolutely.
And both sides are happy. It's a win-win.
It's a win-win. I mean, we have to do more. We have to do more of this. I mean, you see, what I think is critical is understanding the value chain of aviation. Consolidating the buying power, understanding where the specific centers of expertise in terms of competencies. It doesn't mean that SAA will be everything for everyone, but there are services that you don't consume every day as an airline, but you must actually resource for them. That's where the economics go off the window. But if I know that these services are consumed periodically by different airlines, I'm happy to build those competencies because there are shared costs amongst many of us. Then you're starting to improve the P&L in the aviation sector. So these are the things that needs us to go beyond ego. There is a sense in most industries, and I think predominantly the aviation sector, I think if I look at telco, retail, and others, this notion of sharing, because in fact digital presents, it's a sharing economy where assets that belong to different people can be stitched together through a digital interface and be rendered to market as if they're owned by one. That's dominant in retail and in banking as well as in telecoms. Because this aviation is an asset-intensive industry, I don't think we've moved advanced enough our logic of reasoning to say, beyond just the aircraft, the other services that are horizontal that don't need to be occupied every day, you could resource for them and provide to partners, and therefore you lower the cost of doing business. So this is how we are thinking about partnering deeply. So when you talk about AWA, Africa World Airlines, we're saying, what is the roadmap that we can do? So how are you addressing the MRO? I guess the same. Everyone has a need for MRO. So if you look at Ethiopia, let's say we do something together. So what will be their competence center? So if they do engines, can we do landing gear in SAA? And therefore we rebalance things. So that's when I talk about aggregating and the commercial side.
Thank you.
So there are opportunities, but I think we've just left the door ajar and we are not doing enough about these things.
Thank you. All right. Now on to our next topic, privatization. Should South African Airways be privatized? It needs to be recapitalized. Should it be privatized? Would you prefer domestic or external investors if it were?
I think that we have to probe this question of ownership. To be honest with you, I'm very neutral about who owns the asset. It doesn't matter. The fact that it's in private hands or in public hands, it's much of muchness. It's how you operate the asset. This is very important. It's how the shareholder operates the asset. The mind of the shareholder, the consistency of decision, the focus on the price. This is not to say a government is bad, private sector is good. There are cases of failed private sector investment because the shareholder, it was not focused. So the mind and the commitment of the shareholder is critical. Equally, there are a lot of cases of failed public sector enterprises that have failed. And often we make this thing like binary. Actually, I don't really care who owns the asset. What I mind about is how the shareholder thinks about the asset the intentions of the shareholder around the asset, the enablement of the shareholder to actually make sure we can achieve the goals we want. If you look at the Fortune Global 500, from 2007 to now, there's probably, I think there were about 27 public state-owned enterprises in that list. They're probably over 100 now in the Fortune Global 500. So these are examples of public sector-owned enterprises that are very successful, and some of them are listed, and a lot of them now are Chinese. So it just begins to tell you that this notion about what's good and bad in ownership is probably a bit of, we're missing the point. The point is not who owns, is whether you've got the right shareholder thinking behind this, to make the right decision, appoint the right board, appoint the right executive, put everyone fit to fire to execute. Yeah. And we've got failures and successes, both public and private. So I'm kind of neutral about who owns, who doesn't, who owns SAA, who doesn't own it. All I think is important is shareholder focus, focusing on the goal, enablement,
management independence,
management ability to execute. You look at Ethiopia, we talk about Ethiopia today, it's a classic case study of state-owned. Yep. So because of focus, making sure they deliver, government has a higher purpose around the asset. It's a success case. Look at Emirates. Yep. All of them, a lot of assets. You look at Dubai Aerospace. Yep. All of these are state-owned, but it's the mind of the shareholder, what you want to do with the asset, who you appoint in the boards, what type of executives you appoint, what other considerations that you put in the board. To those considerations assist the business, so they don't assist. So it's not a case of choice of who owns. All you want is consistency in terms of what you want to achieve.
Yeah, I think that's a really refreshing perspective. So the ownership could be neutral as long as the management is given independence to run the airline professionally with minimum interference from the
it's a vision. It's a vision. If you look at what's happening in Ethiopia, I can't speak for them. You can see that there's a bigger agenda around promoting tourism in Addis, really providing access points, visa legislation gets relaxed. You also see that the domestic market, for aviation market in Ethiopia is very, very thin. But then the big part is always going to be the intercontinental one, the international one, if you like. The same template with what happened in Emirates. If you look many decades ago, same scenario, but it got built up. Alongside that, you build infrastructure for tourism, you bring a financial hub and so on. But the airline delivers the early beginnings of the development of a bigger strategy. And that does not mean that must be done on a loss-based model. So that's why I talk about a bigger agenda beyond just the airline. I think we that's for me the trick about the mind and the vision of the shareholder. What do you want to achieve with the asset? Yes. So if I just make just a quick point here without spending too much time. You see, if you look at state-owned enterprises, you plot them into a graph. So on the y-axis, you can plot strategic value. Strategic value for me is all about saying the enterprise is addressing notions of market failure where the private sector wouldn't fly to domestic destinations. So you are able to say, if I don't have a enterprise that is in the aviation sector, I will have a challenge of the development of the domestic market, assuming there's no one addressing that market. If you look at roads as an example, the private sector is not going to build roads unless they can turn to profitability within range. But government can invest on a multi-year basis because they're driving an economic agenda. So it is okay to have a roads agency that may not be profitable because the macroeconomic impact, socio-economic impact is bigger. So that's why you said you sit high on social value, social contribution. And by all means, you have to try and make sure you're profitable. But I'm talking about market failure where private sector couldn't invest. Then on the x-axis, you have got the profitability. So if you are low on profitability, low on social value, then you need to start asking questions around this. Therefore, the big focus is to push on the profitability side to make sure you are profitable. You change how you operate, you change how you execute the business. What's critical is to be on the magic quadrant, what I say is the top right corner, high on social value and high on profitability. That's the sweet spot where all of us, not just airlines, all state-owned enterprises should always aim for. So if we embrace that, if the shoulder gets it, the board gets it, management gets it, that we're aiming to go there, perhaps your starting point, if you're low on social, because you're no longer addressing market failure, you're sitting low on social contribution and low on profitability, the decision-making process pushes you straight like a private sector company with no social agenda towards the profitable contract, and then you start building up social intervention, because you can only lift when you're strong enough as well. So this is the kind of strategic way I'm thinking about this, and I think it's not rocket science. We just need to align around this shareholder, board, executive to actually work on those things.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's turn to your fleet. In order, excuse me, in order to increase profits and reduce costs, you really need to complete your fleet renewal program. Could you just update us on where you are in that cycle?
Yeah. So I'm not going to say much on this, because
I hope you're not going to cut the mic now.
Yeah, I think this is where the guy cuts the mic. So I'm not going to say much. I just think that because we are going through a process.
Okay.
Safe to say we are clear in our mind that the current fleet profile will not take us forward from the economics point of view. We've still got the 340 and 4-engine aircrafts and so on. So we're clear that to weather the storm, we must be able to get more efficient instruments to run the business, but at the same time, we have to improve the customer experience on board. So that is a big strategic lever we're pulling through, and there are processes that are running behind the scenes to make sure we get somewhere there.
Okay, that was very vague. Could you tell us, is there a timeline in terms of any announcements, in terms of, when you are going to take on some new equipment?
It's very far. You see, these are large processes that are state-owned processes. It's very difficult to predict. But what I know today is that we have a very clear fleet strategy. There's a process underway. So it's very hard to say we'll make any announcement soon, but we are working on it.
Could you say yes or no? Are some OEMs have a greater appetite for SAA than others? I mean, it would appear that some leading OEMs have pulled out of the battle, as it were.
No, I can't comment on it, because I think I think you're getting. I'm far enough from the fire of the sourcing process, but I must be honest with you.
Yeah.
My own experience with working with OEMs, all of them, from large gauge aircraft, small gauge aircraft, there's a lot of goodwill around SAA, people wanting to work with us to pull through the difficult times. So for me, that's encouraging. Even at the level of that, sharing ideas of what we have seen in other markets without necessarily giving us monetary value. So that kind of insight has helped us a lot to actually be able to include in our strategic logic and strategic thinking. So I think, other than just an expression of appreciation, because a lot of the people have come to SAA to want to collaborate. And I didn't always get a sense that it's the people who want to sell us something, because they probably know that we're not in the buying cycle. But they want us to pull through. There's a sense of empathy, the sense of belief in the brand. They want the brand to be there. And it's a word of thanks to many of them. Small gauge, large gauge, distribution partners, and the digital side, GDSs, all of it. People have come through. And I didn't get a sense that they were coming through to sell us anything, because they know we're not in the buying cycle. But they want to see how we can optimize, improve processes so that we get back on our feet. And we've used a lot of that insight in SAA to actually include in our strategy.
And we have an audience here of eminent lessors and OEMs from around the world. What would be your message to them in terms of what they can do better to help you at SAA?
I think I'm asking for perhaps not even for SAA, yes, but largely for, in my view, the aviation sector in Africa. We have to understand the challenges that we're facing. Poor economics, weak currencies, which oscillate like this. That makes the predictability of your income statement very, very weak. Now, if we use the normal mature market commercial models in financing aircraft and leaving me exposed significantly, so therefore I would think that you're not innovating enough. I think there are, and I don't necessarily want to pay for lack of exposure. I still think that there are very smart people in the industry who can find solutions within the structure of the sector that begins to cushion the variability of the cost structure of the industry to the airlines. So it's all going to be innovation. It's probably not going to be a 1% less here and so on. We're probably looking at a structural configuration of how we approach the model. So I'm calling for new models that that can help Africa succeed. Those models could mean a little bit sharing of risks today, sharing more risk today than it is, because I actually think that lessors pass all risk to us. This is my view, and I'm happy to make the statement because I could be proven wrong. But I would like to see more risk sharing because we are building something together. If there is sharing and is offset by long-term future enterprise together. So I think I call it that way. I'm sure there are enough smart people who could interpret this into commercial models that go for risk sharing and also give us a bit of a headroom to do things, give us a bit of predictability. This is not just SA. I think I probably speak for other African airlines around this, but it's a universal challenge.
Thank you so much. Before we close, could I invite any questions or comments on what we've heard so far? So what I'll do in closing, you've been in office 18 months. Is that correct?
I think more or less. I'll be second year in November. My year
so
complete second
almost
year
2
in
years.
November. Yeah, November I'll be 2 years.
2 years, congrats. Have you achieved as much as you had wished when you started?
I think a lot has been achieved at SAA in the period. I think one of the key things that, in my view, has been very clear is about making it bare and clear of where we are to every employee, to understand how much loss are we making per passenger that we carry, and so on, so that we, at a rent and cents level, not in colloquial terms, not in RASK, CASK, because these things are mathematical formulas. So we go specifically for every passenger carried in domestic, you lose so much. So then you bring it home so that people can understand. So that pushes the urgency for people to act rationally in terms of the explanation of how we buy things, how we do things. So a lot of transformation in that side of things. I think there's a lot of progress. I also think that in the customer experience corridor, Zux is here, she runs that business. There's a lot more progress in how we improve customer experience. And this is not about putting a lot of endearments on board the aircraft. We don't put perfumes, we don't put all these things. We would love to do that, but we're not in that cycle for it today. But we rely on the commitment, personal commitment of our people. So when you host people in your home, we don't ask you to say, we need a specific type of meal. Whatever you give me, as long as it's done hospitable, is probably the biggest upside. And that's what we're working on. We're working on human effort. And that creates the foundation for the day we are able to bring the endearments, then I think we'll shatter the world completely. So these are the kind of things we have done. So so I've had setbacks in terms of evolving the organizational design. Took us a bit of time. We've done it now. We've got the structure approved. We're getting to a point now where we can start dealing with populating the structure. So we are going to engage internally with staff. But some of the key things, finding a framework to engage with unions to actually be able for them to understand where we are, has been one of the great areas of progress. Speaking transparently, openly, taking their ideas. Great people have got ideas. I didn't get any trade union coming asking for money all the time. Yes, they will ask periodically during the increase, but what they brought into my meetings all the time say, we can save money there, we can save money there. For me, that's achievement. In terms of progress, one of the key things perhaps one would have worked better, had deep insights of public sector processes, was to gauge the speed of decision making. It's very different from private sector. So you make certain assumptions about how long it will take to make a call on an issue. So then you discover that just the processes, that just the levels of engagements, how many people must have a say, and they just don't look at it and say, it's okay. They have to do proper due diligence. Rightfully so, because if you're going to approve something, you must make sure you're approving something that you believe in. So that on its own slows us down a bit. So if you ask me, is there something I could have, if I were to recast the plan, I would have factored a lot of penalty on decision making, because it's unlike private sector. It doesn't make it wrong. Just you have to consult many people. I think what we need to do is accelerate the pace for everyone to make the decision. If you are going to have to review something, review it in time, we decide. It doesn't mean cut out of the process. No, that's not what we're asking for. It's just the speed of doing things. So great progress. We could have recast the plan slightly differently had we had deep insights about how long it takes to make decisions.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I mean, I first, at South African Airways, my first CEO that I encountered was Gert van der Veer. So that goes back quite a while. And I've had the privilege of knowing all the CEOs at quite a close range ever since. I would like to say, analyzing yourself, that you strike me, and from my observation, you are very knowledgeable, very humble. You've managed to gain the respect of your staff, first and foremost, which is critical, and the industry. I've seen you engage with African CEOs, airline CEOs, with the foreign CEOs, in such a positive manner. And I'm quite sure that your achievements at SAA, and what you've brought to SAA, in my view, is stability. We had almost like a revolving door at the management level, and since you've been there, there has been some management stability and great progress. And I'm quite sure all of us wish SAA and your good self continued success. It's a great airline for which I have tremendous respect. We look forward to learning about the fleet renewal program when it's announced officially. We look forward to building bridges around Africa, like in Ghana, in many other places, and we appreciate that, because never forget that African airlines around Africa, they look up to you, SAA, as a leader. Whereas in SAA, you might be consumed with your own sort of challenges. But when you look at it wider, they do look up to you for leadership. And I've really been impressed when we're at IATA to see you engaging with the global leaders. And I want to commend you and congratulate you for that. And of course, I really appreciate the fact that you would take time from your busy schedule to be with us at this conference once again. And the yearly updates, as I mentioned, have become a fixture for us. And I think we all should give Mr. Vuyani a warm round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nick.